It was August 29th, 1970 at the Isle of Wight off the southern coast of Britain. MC Ricky Farr stepped up to the mic in front of a crowd of over 600,000 people and said,
"Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for their first debut performance ever, Emerson, Lake and Palmer."
Wait, what? First of all, saying first debut is like saying first twice. Secondly, this wasn't their first debut, first performance. Less than a week before, ELP performed for a little over 400 people at Plymouth Guildhall. A major difference in crowd size, to say the least. Both shows featured one of ELP's most enduring live songs, Pictures at an Exhibition. In this episode, I'll be taking a close look at Pictures and how it made it and almost didn't make it to its own live album.
In December of 1969, keyboardist Keith Emerson of the band The Nice approached Greg Lake backstage at the Fillmore West in the United States. This was one of Lake's final shows as singer and bass player for the legendary King Crimson. Although Lake had initially declined Emerson's offer to start a new group, he would soon change his mind. Drummer Carl Palmer, formerly of the Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and at the time Atomic Rooster, joined the band, rounding out progressive rock's first supergroup, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Keith Emerson had been no stranger to classical music, adapting many classical pieces for The Nice.
Toward the end of his tenure with The Nice, Emerson and his wife came across an orchestral concert of Pictures at an Exhibition at the Royal Festival Hall in London. Emerson was so moved by the piece, he purchased the sheet music. He was delighted to find a piano transcription because Pictures was originally written as a piano piece. The band agreed it would be fun to play in their live set, and the music began to evolve to fit a three-piece Prog group.
But where did this classical composition come from exactly?
As mentioned earlier, Pictures at an Exhibition was written as a piano suite by Russian composer Modest Mussorgsky. Pictures had been written for Mussorgsky's friend Victor Hartmann. Hartmann, an artist, had recently passed away, and Mussorgsky wanted to pay a tribute to his fallen comrade. Each piece of the suite had been inspired by 11 pictures which illustrated different locales around Europe. The pieces were connected by a recurring theme called Promenade, which signified the walk between each picture and Mussorgsky's changing moods. Unfortunately, only 6 of the pictures are known to exist, leaving people only to speculate what the others look like through their titles and Mussorgsky's musical interpretations. Mussorgsky would pass away on March 16, 1881, a week after his 42nd birthday. It was not until 1886, 5 years after his passing, that Pictures would first find its way to print. Maurice Ravel fully orchestrated Pictures in 1922 and remains one of the most popular and recognizable versions to date.
It was no secret that ELP borrowed heavily from the classics.
Their live sets, as well as their first self-titled album, featured songs like The Barbarian, a reworking of Bela Bartok's piano piece Allegro Barbaro, and they learned a valuable lesson in copyright infringement in the process. The debut album was released to critical acclaim. Part of this was due to the single Lucky Man, which had been an afterthought since the album was running a little short. Lucky Man had been written by Lake when he was only 12 years old, and although it was more of a folk song, it made use of one of the earliest synthesizers called the modular Moog. Soon after the release of their first album, ELP's version of Pictures at an Exhibition was filmed at Lyceum Theatre in London on December 9, 1970. This would later get a theatrical release in the United States in March 1973 titled Rock and Roll Your Eyes. Interestingly enough, this was not the version released on the album due to problems from the recording. According to Lake, there was overspill on all the tracks. For instance, the drums were on the piano track and the bass on the organ track. In general, the recording lacks presence and thankfully wasn't released as a finished product on vinyl. The movie, however, was released with very odd visuals. Incorporated into the film are colorful effects including what looks to be a kaleidoscope sequence. Also, Marvel Comics superheroes are inexplicably flashed over the performance.
I suppose the editors wanted to make sure that everybody who walked into the theater was on a level playing field, whether they were high or not. Although it has its flaws, it is still a great early document to ELP's live performances, and personally, I'll take what I can get. What the heck?
In January of 1971, ELP entered the studio to record their second album, Tarkus. Tarkus featured a sidelong title track based on an armadillo tank hatched from an egg in a volcano. The band was trying not to be pigeonholed for doing only reinterpretations of classical music, and this proved they could be original composers. Tarkus wasn't released until June of 1971 and went to number 1 in the UK and number 9 on the US charts. In the meantime, ELP took a second shot at recording pictures at an exhibition. This time it was on March 26 at Newcastle City Hall in Newcastle. This would be the version released on vinyl. Emerson had chosen Newcastle because he felt this is where ELP would get the best reception in front of a crowd of about 2,000 people. Emerson could also make use of the venue organ, playing the opening notes to Promenade. The rest is recorded history.
The end product ended up being fantastic, and it's one of the best sounding live albums I've ever heard. The band fills every bit of space, and you can hear the nuance of each instrument. The acoustics of Newcastle City Hall lend itself perfectly to a live recording. The album was recorded and engineered by Eddie Oford, who had engineered ELP's first 2 albums, as well as many Yes albums.
Although this is not a carbon copy of Mussorgsky's original piece, as you can see, ELP's updates were very successful, making classical music accessible for the modern listener. As you probably guessed, Blues Variation was not in Mussorgsky's original composition. Pictures also offers the right amount of peaks and valleys. This is probably due to the contrast of styles between Emerson and Lake. Emerson pushes the music forward with the Moog synthesizer, while Lake takes the music into traditional English folk territory with some of his finest acoustic guitar playing and his choir boy vocals. Intermittently, hearing the familiar Promenade also allows the listener to prepare for a stark transition. Palmer is always more than just a timekeeper for the group and adds his personality, including jazzy and big band drum techniques throughout the album. Even moments of self-indulgence, such as the Old Castle and Blues Variation, keeps a listener coming back again and again. The Great Gates of Kiev ends pictures with a great crescendo as Lake sings the lyrics. There's no end to my life, no beginning to my death. Death is life, as his voice slides high into the heavens. Let's also not forget about the closing number on the album, Nut Rocker. This was a reworking of the 1962 hit by B. Bumble and the Stingers, which was used often by ELP as an encore during live shows. This, of course, was an updated version of Tchaikovsky's theme from the Nutcracker Suite. Keeping the theme of rocking the classics, this was the perfect closer for the album, keeping the listener's interest right to the very last note. There was some hesitancy when it came to releasing pictures, as the band wasn't sure where it fit, and they were beginning to shed some of their classical influences so they wouldn't be known as the New Nice. It was decided to be a budget release in November of 1971.
Recording the album live and releasing it for a low price made financial sense, especially with the success of the album. But what made it even more special?
William Neal, who was the creator of the artwork on Tarkus, was commissioned to design yet another album cover. The cover was a gatefold that consisted of blank canvases hanging on a wall. The frames were retrieved at junk shops and hung on a wooden paneled wall in the Hammersmith Town Hall. The display was photographed by Keith Morris and Nigel Marlowe, who, like William Neal, were graduates of Guildford School of Art. To see what is intended for the blank canvases, the consumer would have to purchase the album, remove the shrink wrap, and open up the gatefold. Inside revealed Neal's interpretations to each segment of ELP's versions of Pictures at an Exhibition.
I wasn't sure why William Neal kept his wonderful paintings off the outside of the cover and only revealed them on the inside of the gatefold, so I asked him.
William Neal was introduced to Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf as a child in school, with the task of painting to the music. Peter and the Wolf is always a great introduction to classical music because of its use of imagery, as the different instruments represent different animals within the story. Fast forward to 1971, Neal wanted to convey a real live exhibition to complement a live album. However, there were constraints that came with the size of the cover. The idea expanded into a gatefold, making this into something more than just a budget release. The consumer was going to get more than what they paid for in every way possible.
As for the white canvases on the outside of the album cover, in his own words, Neal said this:
"There's something inviting, promising, and thought-provoking about a blank canvas. A whole load of blank canvases is extraordinary, bewildering, and powerful. Every artist faces a blank canvas. Also, an exhibition of blank canvases would surely be an attention grabber. Perfect as a foil in crowded record stores, made even more intriguing by the name of the band, quite small and likely to be obscured at the base of the album. The odd scale of titles and paintings added to a surreal aspect. Yet it was done with the zeal and dignity of a real show in a real exhibition area."
On the inside of the gatefold, the canvases came to life, giving the listener plenty of imagery for each track. And what about the blank canvas for Promenade?
This is actually a white dove painted on a white background, paying homage to Nick Dartnell's painting on the cover of ELP's first album. This was also a perfect place for William Neal to sign my copy of Pictures at an Exhibition.
So what is the legacy of ELP's Pictures at an Exhibition?
According to Keith Emerson, the album sold 60,000 copies on the first day of its release. It peaked at number 3 in the UK charts and number 10 in the US. Not bad for a budget release. The great Chris Welch of Melody Maker praised the sound, saying it was one of the best live recordings he could recall, giving credit to the engineer Eddie Oford and producer Greg Lake. He also called it one of the finest British group albums that year. Roy Carr of New Musical Express added to the positive feedback by claiming it was the perfect showcase for their musical flamboyancy, and he was also impressed by the recording, commenting on the musical excitement being captured. Even Record Mirror, who were not always on board with ELP, called the album thoroughly enjoyable.
So who didn't like it? Rolling Stone magazine, of course.
Lester Bangs reviewed the album in March of 1972, calling ELP bombastic and tasteless. He even went on to say that if Mussorgsky and Ravel could hear ELP, that they would probably be getting dry heaves in the void.
It's called Heaven, Lester, not the void.
In the 1979 edition of the Rolling Stone Record Guide, Pictures was given 0 stars. Rolling Stone's definition of 0 stars is worthless, a record that need never, or should never, have been created, reserved for the most pathetic bathwater.
Love Beach was given 2 stars in the same publication.
To me, Pictures at an Exhibition is a fine album and honestly one of my favorites from the ELP catalog. The album is recorded in such a way that you can actually feel like you are part of the crowd, feeling the energy in the performance.
If you haven't heard Emerson Lake Palmer's Pictures at an Exhibition, then give it a spin. And if you have heard it, then listen to it again. And I urge you to purchase the album, whether it be on CD, vinyl, or even a download. There are many different live recordings of Pictures that are in existence. What is your favorite version? Outside of the album that I just talked about, I'm impartial to the Isle of Wight version.
If ELP's Prog rendition of Mussorgsky is something you liked, I'd like to recommend Night on Bald Mountain by Fire Ballet. This features another long Mussorgsky composition, Night on Bald Mountain, getting the Prog treatment as well as some other Prog interpretations of classical music.
If you have enjoyed what you have watched, then please give this video a like and subscribe. And if you haven't, you are more than welcome to exercise your freedoms and give it a dislike. Thank you for watching. Less than a week before, EPL